And seated in the co-pilot seat, the favorite of servicemen everywhere, Bing Crosby.
Coming in on a wing and a prayer. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. Though there's one motor gone, we can still carry on. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. What a show, what a fight. Yes, we really hit our target for tonight.
Welcome to Contrails and Cocktails. This episode is going to be a very special one because our guest just finished a book about the World War II bomber boys, the jackets that they wore and the entire language and the entire culture and everything else around these particular items of clothing. So John Slemp was born in Japan, was a world traveler before he was a teen. After attending college on an academic scholarship, he served in the U.S. Army stationed in Germany, and out of curiosity spent many hours visiting well-known museums throughout Europe. Little did he know that he was preparing for a life in commercial photography, with the world's best art being a spellbinding tutor. Fast forward 20 plus years, and his extensive photography experience allows him to create a wide variety of images, including environmental still life, portraits, and lifestyle images. Light, shape, and composition are all tools used to create images for a wide variety of editorial, corporate, and advertising clients worldwide. His goal is to produce the best images possible for each assignment, and he's got a great sense of humor, and he is a big fan of dogs, fly fishing, and a good cheeseburger. So John and I are joined by Mark Perry, who is the president of Global Aircraft Group. Global Aircraft Group sponsors this podcast. They offer desktop appraisals, expert witness, pre-buy inspections. The founder is located in New England, and he travels free of charge to anyone with a situation that needs his services. That might be an aircraft appraisal, an aircraft transaction, an estate settlement, a divorce, a legal situation, an insurance situation, whatever it is. If you've got a problem involving aircraft values, Mark can solve it. So president and founder Mark Perry has over 30 years of experience in corporate aviation. He has an unparalleled access to professional resources and helps the organization achieve positive returns on client investments in capital. Prior to Global Aircraft Group, Mark worked for Bombardier in numerous capacities, including sales, maintenance, completion, and pre-purchase inspections. He worked at one time for the Skunk Works under Kelly Johnson. That's the Lockheed Advanced Development Programs. And he holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Massachusetts in management. He's a certified aircraft appraiser and a licensed airframe and power plant mechanic. Perry also attended the Massachusetts School of Law in Andover. So this is going to be a great conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all about the Bomber Boys. So let's get started.
We sing as we limp through the air. Look below, there's our field over there, with our full crew aboard, and I trust in the Lord, coming in on a wing and a prayer.
John Slemp just recently published a book on the World War II bomber boys, which is, I'm sure, a fabulous book. I need to buy my copy so that I can go through it in detail. I've been seeing pictures of it from it, and I've always followed John's work. It's amazing, and he does great photos. So I'm just excited to have you guys both in the same room.
Yeah,
Rich, nice to be here. Nice to be here. Creating the book in and of itself was a story.
Okay.
I started in 2014, basically as a lark. I knew I'm an Army veteran, and I've known about the jackets for years, but I had never seen one. And so I put the word out through my EAA chapter. If anybody had one, I'd like to see it. And of course, somebody had their uncle's jacket, and they brought it in, and it was spectacular. And so I photographed it, and one of my clients is Women in Aviation International, and I had photographed their board. One of their board members is Dorothy Cochran, she's a curator at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. So just for fun, I sent it to her, in an email. Hey, Dorothy, this is something I'm working on. And 58 minutes later, I got a separate email from the curator of the aviation clothing collection, Dr. Alex Spencer. And he said, we have 15 jackets out of work for your project. When can you be here?
Whoa.
I was shocked, pleased, amazed, all the things you might imagine. And a few months later, we made arrangements and I went up there and I shot 13 jackets and we were off to the races. And, initially it was just about the artwork. I didn't really have much in the way of understanding of the stories and the aerial combat and that sort of thing. And as I got into it and started hearing the stories, and fortunately I was able to meet and photograph, I think, over 25 World War II veterans, 16 WASPs, 16 original Rosies, and that sort of thing, and started hearing their stories, it really became apparent that, this all needed to be about their stories, and the jackets were an appropriate way to tell their stories. And so that's how it got started. There was no thought at all of a book or anything like that. I thought maybe we'll have an exhibition. Maybe we'll have enough to, have an online discussion about lighting techniques and things like that, but it just kept on growing and growing. And we've wound up shooting in over 12 different museums across the country and over 160 jackets. My initial goal was 50.
Wow.
And so we certainly blew that out. And, and of course, I did portraits of the veterans. As I mentioned, we did myself and a friend of mine did a few video interviews, and we've got a little YouTube channel now, and we're trying to flesh that out with some more stories. And, and it just started to take on a life of its own. And at one point, I thought it would be interesting to talk to a fashion historian about how these jackets influence fashion and culture. And lo and behold, I finally found a young lady, and she wrote a chapter for me in the book on that very subject. She said she found so much information. In fact, she's probably going to do her own book on that subject.
Wow.
And, yeah. And
ask a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
When you say jackets, you're talking about the bomber jackets?
Yeah, the A2 summer weight flight jackets. Yeah, they're colloquially known as bomber jackets, and some guys who are really serious about it get exercised when you call them bomber jackets. But the technical name is summer weight A2 flight jacket. Yes.
The leather one?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I know. I got you.
Yeah. And they first came in, they were not a World War II innovation. They first came online in 1931, approved for use. But of course, the Depression was on, and during the Depression years, the numbers were very small as far as the numbers that were manufactured, like 500 maybe in a year. But then as it got closer to the war, 1940 and so on, 41, they started letting out contracts for 5,000, 10,000, 25,000, and 50,000 at max, my best guess, and because of the Depression, inaccurate records, if at all, were kept. Some years there was no record kept of how many were created. So, but my best guess is about 750,000 were actually, manufactured. So anyway, 18 different manufacturers across the country. Most of them were in the Northeast because that's where the majority of the garment industry was.
Right.
And the government at the time procured all the parts. They procured the leather, the zippers, the cuffs and waistbands, the liners, the snaps, everything, and they gave it to the manufacturers along with a diagram that said, build us a jacket. And a jacket cost about $8.25 to put together.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then from that standard jacket, people started to customize, of course.
Yes. Yeah. And technically, it was against regulations, it being the Army. Technically, it was against regulations to paint on them, alter them, that sort of thing. It's still government property. But the casualty rates, especially in the 8th Air Force at the beginning of the war, were so high that the commanders essentially turned a blind eye to the practice. It was good for morale. It gave a sense of crew cohesion, that sort of thing. And the flyers really, really liked the jackets. They looked great. They wore, well, they were work jackets, but, if you didn't trash it, they looked great in uniform. And they were very proud of them. And initially they were just issued to the pilots and so on. And then later on, it became a crew standard issue. And, of course, being the Army, they were traded, with tankers and infantry guys and that sort of thing. But by and large, the flyers held on to them. But most often they didn't wear them on missions because, again, they were not warm. And most of the aircraft were open air, until the B-29 came along, so they, 30,000 feet at, minus 40, minus 50, they didn't have any use for leather jackets.
Right.
Some were worn underneath all the rest of it, but generally, usually most of the time they were left on the ground.
Yeah. But they were a status symbol, and they became like the stories and the everything got painted on there, just like kids do with tattoos nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, and initially I was just interested in the artwork. I thought it was cool. Being a commercial photographer, I've always had an eye for design, I think, as well. And, some of the designs were just fantastic, and the variety, the reason also why the back of the A2 was so attractive to paint on is because it's all one piece. Mm-hmm. There's no seam, no vertical seam, no horizontal seam. So it was a great canvas, so to speak. And just, your imagination ran, the artists ran wild, and they painted aircraft on there. They painted women, they painted bomb patterns, swastikas, all kinds of stuff. And it basically became a walking billboard of a guy's service record.
Yeah.
And once you understand the symbology and so on, you could tell how many missions they flew. Sometimes they painted the target on the bomb, for that particular mission. Swastikas if they shot down a plane, parachutes if they bailed out. A few jackets have a little POW guy with hands up on there, PW, and they participated in missions right at the end of the war where they evacuated POW camps. They flew the B-17s in and loaded them up with guys who needed to get out quickly. And some of the other groups also had flour bags painted on there where they dropped food to the Dutch right at the end of the war because the Germans had instituted a food embargo in late 44 and into 45, and over 18,000 Hollanders died. They starved.
Yeah.
Because the underground cut their rail and that sort of thing. And the Germans got ticked off and said, well, we'll just, cut off this food supplies and tit for tat type thing. But Audrey Hepburn was a child during that time. That was one of the reasons why she was so thin all her life. And had medical problems all her life too because of that. So some of the jackets had that. Some of them had a Russian star on it because there were, trying to remember the name. They had a particular name for several missions that flew across Germany. They dropped their bombs and they kept on going either into Russian-occupied Poland or into Russia itself, where they stopped, they rearmed, refueled, and then flew back, most often across the Balkans, dropping bombs on oil, depots and that sort of thing, to North Africa. And then they would rearm and refuel and fly back across France.
Wow.
Bombs, going back to England. So these guys were literally, and if they got shot down or if they had mechanical problems, these guys were scattered literally all over the European continent.
That's amazing. I had no idea they were so, the area was so wide.
Oh, yeah.
I always think of them in Europe, and the war in Europe, and but that's amazing that they range so far.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't really know that either. And I read a book actually about a captain who he was detailed essentially to go to Russia and recover aircraft. And the Russians being the Russians, they wanted to keep him for the technology. So
of course.
At one point, he had to pull a pistol on a Russian colonel who's like, "Hey, we're going this way, so our guys can, have free reign on the plane." He's like, "No, Colonel, I don't work for you. We're taking this plane out of here. So adios." And, and the guy got the message and left, and they flew the plane out, I think, early the next morning, even though they had to hack their way out of a forest to make a makeshift runway to do it, but, and there were Americans on the ground that they had to evacuate as well, who were shot down and what have you, even though they technically weren't POWs, they weren't, how should we say, treated with hospitality either.
Right. Exactly.
So it was quite, it's quite a human story, actually.
Mm. Sounds like thousands of human stories. And
yeah. One of the stories. So I was driving down to Sun and Fun several years ago, and got a phone call on my cell phone from a fellow in Virginia. Never had met him before. Turns out he's a curator at the Colonial Williamsburg, park or whatever it is. And his uncle had been shot down over the Brenner Pass in February of 45, and was killed. But to make a very long story short, his uncle's brother showed up to that very same unit 2 days later and walked into his tent looking for his brother, Ray. And all the guys were like, "Well, you're fine. How do you do?" And he didn't know his brother had been killed.
Oh.
And so that's how he came to have his brother's jacket, which was then passed down to Eric, the curator at Williamsburg. And he told me this story. He had done a lot of research on the story, and that's in the book. The crew was recovered and actually returned to the States in 49, I believe. The Italians, it was, in the Brenner Pass in February, so it was snow covered, and the Italians buried them. But marked the graves, church records and that sort of thing. And again, I hadn't really thought about it, but there were teams sent out all over Europe looking for guys who had been killed.
Yeah.
And recovered their remains and sent them back to the States. So literally, most of the crew was interred in one place, I believe, in Missouri, in 1949, I believe. So this went on for years. So the war, when it ended, it didn't really end for a lot of people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there was still a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of missing people, a lot of missing everything.
A lot of unrest, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the guys I photographed spent over a year in a VA hospital suffering from PTSD. He had been shot down in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge, and had been wounded in the leg, and a Belgian lady came across him. He said she was a very nice looking, leather jacket and so on. She said, "Are you wounded?" He said, "Yes." "Are you American?" "Yes." And he said, "Wait here, I'll get my husband." They came back and got him. And at one point he was housed in the basement of a German army headquarters, which I thought, now that's pretty cheeky. But, he suffered from PTSD for well over a year after the war. And I could tell, he still had problems essentially. And a friend of mine did a videotape interview after I photographed him. And during the interview, he said, when I go to bed at night, I pray to God that I don't dream.
Oh.
And he was in his 90s, so this never left him.
It never ended for him.
It never ended for him. And, so, you start hearing things like that, and you realize these guys were 18, 19, 20, straight out of high school. Some of them were even younger than that. One fellow from Valdosta, Georgia, his dad forged his birth certificate by a year, and he joined at 17. And at 18, he was a first pilot in England and shot down in a B-17. And they fished him out of the English Channel, and the Brits were like, "So who are you?" "Well, I'm the first pilot." And they're like, "Yeah, he's delusional. We'll come back to you," and and one of the crewmen came back later on and said, "Yeah, he's the pilot," and he wound up finishing his missions in England came back to the States, instructed for a short time, but he was still restless. So he got qualified in B-29s and went to the Pacific Theater and flew 5 missions in B-29s against Japan. And was one of the few guys to fly in both theaters. So just, and he came back, and the war ended. He came back, he was 20 years old. And he became a medical doctor after the war.
And had his whole life ahead of him. Because funny.
And just, 20 years old, I was still trying to figure out which way was up, and, so it was amazing, the fortitude and the devotion and commitment these guys showed, knowing that they were going to get shot at every time they went out on a mission.
Yeah.
If you're in the infantry, you can, hide behind a tree or dig a hole and that sort of thing. And you've got a medic nearby generally and that sort of thing. But there wasn't any medic in the air at 30,000 feet. So if you got wounded in combat, either, one of your fellow crewmen passed you up or you bled to death and froze to death at the same time, which was not that uncommon, or fell out of the plane, which also happened. And, one of the guys I photographed in Alabama, he passed away about 45 days later. And I didn't know this until later on, but on his last mission, he wanted to fly with some friends of his, but he was assigned to another crew. And he asked, can I go with these guys? And he was already in the plane he had been assigned to, and a Jeep pulled up, said, okay, your request has been granted. You can go over to the other plane. So he jumped out of that plane and went into the other one with his buddies. During the mission, the plane that he was originally on was shot down. He was a ball turret gunner, and the ball turret fell out of the plane, and that guy fell to his death. And he saw it happen. He was in the plane next to him. And he came back home and, reunited with his wife and lived to old age. Finally, got a master's degree from Vanderbilt, and that sort of thing. And that was the one thing I really noticed. A lot of these guys came back and really made lives for themselves. A lot of them got advanced degrees, medical doctors, lawyers, started families, started businesses and that sort of thing. And they got on with their lives, and, they didn't come back and mope around and, what can the country do for me type stuff. They didn't do that.
Oh, yeah. Right.
They went after it, and, and it was a different mindset,
Yeah.
And, and that was really heartening and inspiring to me, in a lot of ways.
I worked with a bank manager who was a World War II veteran who had been a pilot. And, he was always the first person in the office in the morning, last person to leave at night. And he was, in his 70s at the time. And, I remember asking him, do you ever sleep? And he says, no, I don't sleep. I'd rather be here than sleeping. And, that's the only conversation we ever had, about his experience. But, just amazing, amazing people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I had known about Jimmy Stewart's jacket being in the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton. And I tried to get in there in 2015, but to make another long story short, they wanted a letter from a publisher, which I didn't have. And we wound up privately publishing, as my designer calls it, which I just love that term, as opposed to self-publishing. So I went away and thought about it, and, in the back of my head, and in 23, in the fall of 2021, by that time I had shot, in lots of different museums and had lots of images to show them. So I contacted him again. A friend of mine had gone there and gotten the director's card. And so I contacted him, and they said, well, we have an office, a PR office in New York City on Fifth Avenue. Contact them, fill out the form, tell us what you want to do. And about a month later, they came back and said, sure, come on down. And so I think their attitude towards self-publishing had changed.
Of course.
And also, they saw the pictures.
Yeah.
And, and that sort of thing. So in January last year, I went to the Air Force Museum, and they gave me a list, and I chose 10 jackets. They said 8. And I said, well, can we do 2 more? And, so we got 10. And
negotiating.
Yeah, and Jimmy Stewart's jacket was one of them. And, I think a lot of people don't realize he flew 20 missions as a B-24 pilot, and he was very well respected as a commander. He joined the Army as a private before the war started. And, and he was actually underweight when he first went. And the guy said, go home and eat some bananas. So he did, and came back a few days later, having gained the 3 or 4 pounds he needed. And I think the limit was 110. He didn't weigh 110 pounds.
Mm.
And anyway, so he came back, made the cutoff, but he was already 33 years old.
Mm.
So he was actually too old to go to, and he was already a private pilot with, I think, over 400 hours. He owned his own plane and all that, already an Academy Award winner.
Mm-hmm.
But he was too old to go through the Army Air Corps, pilot training program.
Right.
And he applied for a commission, which he got, and he was already a college grad. And he applied for some exemption, and became an Air Corps pilot, and then he became an instructor. And I think a lot of the brass were afraid to send him overseas because they didn't want him to get shot down and killed or captured, And so he did that for over a year, I believe, in Idaho, training guys on B-24s and B-17s, I believe. And finally, he walked into his boss's office and said, hey, I'd really like to go and contribute, do my part, And there was a new unit being formed, and his boss called the commander of the new unit, who he knew, said, hey, I got a guy here that wants to come and, join your unit. And a few days later, he was the operations officer for that unit. And then I think 2 weeks later, 20 days, something like that, he became the commander of the unit.
Wow.
Just that fast, And so of a squadron, and they went to England, and he later became a group commander. And eventually, at the end of the war, he was promoted to full colonel. He was one of the few guys in the war that went from private to colonel. And later, he stayed in the reserves and became a brigadier general and retired as a brigadier general.
Okay.
Again, a lot of people don't know that. I didn't know it, but he flew as an observer in a B-52 mission in Vietnam.
Mm.
And was actually checked out on several jets as well after the war.
A long career. Yeah,
exactly.
I didn't realize that. But...
Yeah. And, so... but I tried to get a variety of jackets there. We got a Tuskegee Airman. We got a guy who got off the ground during the Pearl Harbor attack. We got Jimmy's jacket. We got a flight nurse's jacket. We got a Medal of Honor recipient. And we just got another cool jacket from the Pacific Theater that had some really wonderful artwork on it. Just a cross section, of jackets. And the book is organized by theater. I muddled for a little while on how to organize it, but in the beginning, we have a little bit of history and, how the jackets came about and how they're constructed and that sort of thing. And then we have the European theater, and then we have the second chapter, if you will, is the Mediterranean and North Africa, and then China, Burma, India, and the Pacific. And a lot of people, I'm sure these days especially, have no idea that we were in China, Burma, and India.
Right. Not that early. Right. Everybody thinks of the Asian wars as coming later. So.
Right. And I got Tex Hill's jacket too, even though it's a Navy jacket. He was originally in the Navy and went over as part of the original Flying Tigers with Claire Chennault. And then when they were disbanded on the 4th of July, 1942, they were reconstituted into the Army Air Force as the 14th Air Force, I believe. And he became I believe, a group commander and was commissioned in the Army.
Wow.
Because as a member of the AVG, they had to resign their commissions.
Yeah.
So a lot of the guys stayed, left and went back to the States or did other things, but he stayed and I believe was commissioned a major, and then shortly after lieutenant colonel, and he became the commander, I believe, of the 23rd Fighter Group in the 14th Air Force and stayed with Chennault basically the rest of the war. And I believe he retired as a brigadier general in the Texas Air National Guard.
You know, John, you could do an audiobook of, just read the book. I mean,
Yeah, I guess,
podcast, but I
I
think
mean,
that would be
I
fantastic.
don't know why. Well, I was always interested in military, especially World War II history ever since I was a
Yeah,
kid,
right.
and of course, my dad was in the service. We lived on Okinawa for 4 years, so it was like, it just seemed natural to me to be interested in all this stuff. And then I was in the Army almost 11 years, so I understand the military mentality, if you will.
Yeah.
I tell people I had 13 years prior service as a kid because that's how old I was when my dad retired, so,
Yeah.
so, but, it, this book has really helped me put together a lot of the pieces, on operations, the flow of the conflict from start to finish,
Yeah.
how it was a worldwide event, how we were involved. One of the jackets I photographed in California has 12 camels painted on it, for flying the hump, which is what they call the Himalayas, resupply missions to China. One of them is facing backwards because they had to turn back, difficulties with, the plane. So,
That's
but
amazing.
oh yeah, but the guy who owns the jacket found a letter inside the pocket years after he bought the jacket, and the letter is written as if the jacket is telling the story. So he
Oh,
says, I'm here in northern India and we're doing this. And then we go to China and we're doing this. And, and there's no name. So we have no idea who owned the jacket.
yeah. Well, we'll have
And
to have you back, I think, for more episodes because, you've got so many stories. It's
oh yeah, it's,
yeah.
I could go on, I guess. Yeah. Sorry. But
Mhm. Not at all. Yeah. I think
it,
that's
it, it
fantastic.
became very fascinating to me, and
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons why it's almost 400 pages, because it just kept, initially we were thinking, maybe 250 or so, and then it got to 300, and then it kept on growing. But the other thing too is it has an index.
Uh-huh.
None of the other books on the subject that were done 25 years ago have an index, which I didn't realize until I was very far along with this.
Hmm.
So I made it a point that this has an index because you can find stuff. And,
Yeah.
and I have a feeling it's going to be used for research purposes too. Actually, I have a book in the box ready to go tomorrow to a manufacturer in Germany, small company that makes A2 jackets and German flight jackets, leather jackets, that their pilots wore. And
Wow.
I'm sure he's going to use it for research.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
The Auburn University Library just got one for their research collection.
Right.
Um,
I mean, this is history that nobody knew, nobody's put together and nobody's written down or photographed. So, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So Mark, tell us about your B-17 that you saw recently. Is that?
Well, I'd like to back up on the Jimmy Stewart thing. I had read a lot of that, which that John just spoke about, but also I'd read that when he made "It's a Wonderful Life," some of those scenes they said you could see as combat fatigue. That it kind of affected his performance. The reality, the realness of his performance.
Yeah, that was his first movie after the war, and that scene where he's kind of cracking up, I think in a bar, was real, and the director wanted him to do it again because they wanted to come in tighter on his face, and Jimmy said, "I can't do it again," and so what they did was they rephotographed the film and cropped it, which we would do digital these days, but absolutely. He and apparently he didn't really talk much about the war, from what I understand.
No, he had some combat fatigue from that, but I'm pretty sure my friend's father's name was Louis Fazio. He was a tail gunner. He did, but he was not on B-17. He was on B-20. He started on B-17s, went to England on B-17s, but then he was transferred to B-24s, and he did 33 combat missions. And then in his military records that I have, he was sent to a hospital for 6 months of rest. You know, he was a tail gunner on a B-24, so he saw who knows what he saw.
Yeah.
But they have his jacket fully restored just in the last year or so.
Oh, wow.
It's got the artwork on the back. It's definitely 8th Air Force. And like I said, I've gotten the paperwork, you know, the flight records that they, I don't know if they blanked it out for security reasons, but they have the flight records are standard forms. And it shows him coming over with the 1st Air Force. And then when they list the sheet that shows all of the bombing runs he was on, they didn't fill it out at all. So there's no way to know who he was attached to.
Right.
Or and here's what else. Here's the other piece that's been frustrating is we know the aircraft he was on. He was on Dragon Lady, D-24 named Dragon Lady.
Okay.
His Dragon Lady's on his jacket, and but there's
is there a squadron or group patch on the front?
I'll have to double check, but that's a good idea. We'll have to find. I'll have to ask my buddy that, and then the Dragon Lady that's the most common is attached to another well-researched squadron and bomber group, and they have the list of everybody and everybody was involved. Yeah, but I cannot find this Dragon Lady tied in with into the 8th Air Force, so that I could get the bombing missions because I'm stuck on what squadron he was in. So anyway.
I do know that there were some B-24s that I think were transferred from the 8th to the 9th Air Force, I believe, and wound up in the Mediterranean or North Africa.
No, all of his bombing missions are in European theater.
Okay.
Out of England.
Okay.
So we definitely know he was.
So he stayed in the 8th. Yeah, he stayed in the 8th.
Yes, he was in the 8th Air Force, and he was with, and he was, you know, he may have bombed Dresden. We don't know.
Right.
So it'd be nice someday to figure that out for my buddy. But
you know, they might have records at the 8th Air Force Museum in Pooler as well, outside Savannah. They have a pretty big library upstairs, and they have lots of records.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe I can get that information. I'll touch base with you after our podcast.
I was just going to say, do you want me to edit this bit out? You know, about your.
If you need to.
Okay. Great. Yeah.
But, anyway,
I can imagine all of the families that are going to be, you know, going through all of this history and, you know, getting their questions answered. That's actually a missing piece for a lot of folks that are doing their ancestry.com or whatever, and then they come across the book and put the whole book in, you know.
Yeah. I've had several people get real emotional about the book. You know, when they read their stories and that sort of thing. You know, it hits home. Hits home for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I know we could have gotten his jacket in. John, have you been to the Mid-Atlantic Airshow at all?
No, I haven't. I've got an exhibition coming up at the Military Aviation Museum in Virginia Beach, probably late March, early April, but I've not been to that particular air show, no.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Probably one of the largest that I know of. It's all World War II. It's military, you know, World War II equipment. They have the Andrews sisters, there's shows, there's dance, there's, you know, the flight. That's where I did the B-17 flight that I was getting ready to segue into.
I see.
I did that. It's the first week of June every year.
Okay.
And I'm also a member of the 26th Yankee Division out of New England. It was that regiment pretty much covered almost all the soldiers that went into World War I went over with the 26th Yankee Division out of New England.
Wow.
And then also pretty much the same in World War II. And then they've been absorbed into other units. I think around the mid '80s. But I'm in that reenactment group, so I collect a lot of World War II stuff.
Gotcha.
A lot of original stuff that I can get, and then I do some reenactments, living histories, and then our unit is usually in force at that air show.
Gotcha.
So I did my tribute flight 2 summers ago, and on Yankee Lady out of Michigan, and it was amazing. And I'll send, while it's at it, I'll send you a video of that, pictures or whatever that I have if you want them.
I'd like to use them. I'd like to use them in the episode. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Before I forget, one of the other chapters in the book was written by Jeff Schrader, who's an appraiser for Antiques Roadshow, and he wrote a section on collecting the jackets. And,
wow.
And it's actually pretty funny in several places. His mom was an English teacher, so he's a good writer too.
Yeah.
But he has a company called Advance Guard Militaria out of Missouri, and he buys and sells, all these military items, and I put the word out on Facebook, I don't know, a year and a half ago. I was looking for somebody who was an expert on collecting the jackets, and several people said, call Jeff Schrader. And I'm like, I had no idea who he was. So he agreed to, participate, and made a nice contribution.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was very nice.
So do you have a collection of these jackets, or?
Who, me? No, I don't have one at all. People ask me that all the time. I need to, if I get one, it needs to be extra huge, but no, I don't have one. Maybe I'll get one. I don't know yet.
Cool.
Very good.
So, Mark, tell us about the B-17 that was at the Mid-Atlantic Airshow.
Yeah, I was at it was right after COVID, or, well, there is no right after, I guess, but.
There's no such thing as right after COVID. We're still trying to figure out when that is.
Anyway, it was 2 summers ago. And I was going to go up on the B-24. It was a B-24 Pancho Vita was the name of that one. And then they called me. They had a mechanical problem, which I was glad to hear of, because I was considering going up in the B-17 that crashed in Hartford. And so a couple, some time had gone by since that had happened. And then so I felt, well, the maintenance is, anyway, long story short, I canceled Pancho Vita, and then I just happened to take a walk over, and so I kind of got bumped out of that aircraft, and I said, well, we got a seat for you in an hour on the B-17. So I got in, I said, okay, I'll be right back. And got in by, it was really hot that day, and we got in, sat us right behind the radio room. And with the door to the radio room open to the bomb bays, the bomb bay doors were open.
Oh, wow.
That catwalk going across is just about barely a foot.
Yeah, it's minuscule.
Rope. So we took off. From my seat, I was watching the runway, looking out through the radio room from the bomb bays down to the tarmac as we were taking off. And then they closed the doors. And then after you get up in the air, they let everybody get up and just wander around. It was great. So
that's amazing.
So I got I went across the catwalk. Of course, you can see through the bomb bay doors down to the ground. Through the some openings. They don't seal perfect.
No.
So I got across that catwalk with the ropes on each side, and then up. And then there's just a crawl space under the pilots to get to the bomb bay, or to the bomber section of the nose.
Bombardier and the navigator.
Yeah, bombardier.
Yeah.
Where the Norton bomb site is. And so I decided I would crawl in backwards instead of, because my back, I got my back. So I got back stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, this would be easier. Well, I got in there, and then I had to turn around. And they had all these warnings. They said, don't touch, and if you're, 12 o'clock high where the pilots, Gregory Peck just grabs the edges of the opening and just chins himself up in there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm over that doorway, and they said, don't touch any of these, you'll fall through. And I had to put my hands all around that thing to get myself turned around forward.
Uh-huh.
And then I crawled up into the bomb bay, and it was like riding in the front of a bullet.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was amazing. There was a little kid. It was his first flight, and he was sitting in the seat, just like he wasn't moving. So I stayed up there for a while, and then crawled back, and it was very enjoyable. I'm glad I did it.
Oh yeah.
That's amazing. That sounds like a fantastic experience. And there's not very many of them flying anymore.
No, I just lost that other one in Dallas. So
Yeah. And the EAA aluminum ore cast, which is in the book, by the way, it's down for a spar. They're just in the process of moving it back to Oshkosh so they can fix it. It'll probably be next year before it flies again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would really love to appraise a B-17. I have sold a Stinson 77 that had been in World War II air ambulance.
Wow.
But yeah, that's on my list to and I guess I should put a plug in that I do, I can do a museum or IRS appraisals.
Sure.
And I have.
That's cool.
So not a lot, but.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you a pilot as well, I assume?
No, I was maintenance my whole life.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, did you have a cocktail for us tonight?
I do, in honor of literally one of my favorite World War II movies, 12 O'Clock High. Mm-hmm. Me, my dad, and my youngest son would watch that when we'd go out to visit him. And then my son and I had watched it, and when he was younger, he had a World War II flight simulator, and he actually knew more about it, World War II aircraft, than I did at the time. And then we got it. We went down to Smithsonian in Washington, and we started collecting some Noah's Ark pictures when we could, and so that's one of my favorite World War II movies, and I believe that's on the 8th Air Force with that.
Yeah.
And the anyway, so so tonight's cocktail is called 12 O'Clock High.
Okay.
Of course. But this one has 1.5 ounce of Jägermeister. I said that right?
Yeah. Jägermeister.
Jägermeister.
Yeah.
It's my brother's
1.5
favorite.
ounce of dry vermouth. 1 dash of aromatic bitters, and you garnish it with a cherry.
Dash of bitters and a cherry.
Right. We'll make a recipe card for it for the.
Yeah.
But that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Are you using those dark cocktail cherries or the any particular kind of cherry?
I would use the dark cocktail cherries.
Yeah, you mentioned that in one of the other podcasts, and I got some of those. They're fantastic. They're expensive.
They are.
Great.
They
I can just eat a jar of cherries. They're great.
And then it's hard to find a good drink that mixes well with Jägermeister.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of different flavors in that spice. So this will be kind of interesting, I think.
I'd never heard of Jägermeister being used in a cocktail before. That's different.
No.
Yeah.
And I had heard about that somewhere else, and wanted to come up with
Yeah. Well, fantastic. And
I didn't make this drink up myself. It's one I picked that we like that had Jägermeister, and that would fit in.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's just kind of do a big finish. I'm Paula Williams, ABCI. We help aviation companies sell more of their products and services.
I'm John Slemp. I'm a aviation photographer, commercial photographer in Atlanta, Georgia, and have just written a book called Bomber Boys, World War II Flight Jacket Art. And it can be found at www.wwii.bomberboys.com. I put in the WWII because I did not want the FBI showing up at my door on Sunday morning with Bomber Boys as the website address. So make sure you got the WWII in front of Bomber Boys.
I'm looking forward to getting a copy of that.
Thank you.
It's Mark Perry, Global Aircraft Group, and based out of Hartford, Senior Certified Aircraft Appraiser, Aviation Consultant, Insurance Claims, and Expert Witness, all things aviation, financial. It's www.globalaircraftgroup.com.
Globalaircraftgroup.com.
We really hit our target for tonight. How we sing as we live through the air. Look below, there's our field over there. With our full crew aboard, and I trust in the Lord, coming in on a wing and a prayer. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. Coming in on a wing and a